Hi, everyone. It's Amy Campbell with InfoNet, and I'm here with Carlyn Crowe with the Iowa DD Council, and we're here for our final 2023 snapshot because the legislative session ended on May 4th. So last week on Thursday, just after noon, the legislators finished up their work and they are done for the year. They won't be back until 2024. So I've been calling this session Everything Everywhere All at Once. If you haven't seen that movie, you should. But it seemed like that, didn't it, Carlyn? It was really fast paced this year. And this last week was pretty, there were a lot of slow times, but they really marched through all of the bills. In fact, they passed 64 bills in the final week, including all of the budgets. So I want to talk a little bit about the budgets because that is a major part of what got accomplished this last week. And the legislature decided to spend a little less than they could. So 89% of what their allowed spending was. So they're going to save up some more money for more tax cuts. That means that the budgets were pretty good, but not big increases anywhere. We're happy to report that there was $33.5 million more added to Medicaid, and that includes $13 million to raise reimbursement rates for behavioral health and mental health providers, something that was really a high priority of the Department of Health and Human Services when they looked at all of the rates around our surrounding states. They really realized that the people that provide those services really are paid a lot less than what they would be in Nebraska or a neighboring state. They also added $5.5 million for to pay for the raises they did last year for home and community-based services providers. They had enough federal money to get through almost all of this year, but not quite. So they had to spend $5.5 million of state dollars to continue that increase. They also added $15 million for nursing homes, and that's all state money. So you know, when you talk about behavioral health and mental health and $13 million, that's really like more like $35 million in state funding. So, or in federal and state funding. But I did want to make a note of that home and community-based services and funding, the $5.5 million, just to keep rates where they're at now. In the next legislative session in 2024, they're going to have to find $21 million to keep those rates going forward. So that's because they use federal funds to do it, and they've got to eventually replace it with state dollars. So that is something that legislators know about and they're thinking about. And so we all should be remembering that for next year, as well as the Department of Justice is probably going to come back with their recommendations and requirements for the state. In the Glenwood case, we had our first consent decree, and then we'll have our second one coming up here soon. And it's going to likely require the state to put a lot of money in home and community-based services. So I've heard people at HHS talking about $100 million. And to pay for that, there was a bill that passed this year that taxes the MCOs, the managed care companies, and that tax, they're going to use it to draw down more federal dollars and then give them back their money that they paid in tax, but then keep the federal match. So that actually generates about 100 to 120 million a year. So I think those two numbers are important to think about, that we're going to have to look at the $21 million to replace those federal dollars for home and community-based services. And then if we're talking about $100 million invested in the system to meet all of the needs of people in the community, that's another 100 million. So that's kind of about the same amount as that MCO tax. So don't know if that's what they're thinking, but that is definitely a source of funding that could be used to make those commitments to home and community-based services. I will say also, I know Carolyn and I got really excited about an increase that was originally planned for vocational rehabilitation. And unfortunately, that did not end up in the final mix. So we're talking about just a status quo funding, which is disappointing. You know, they get a really good match. So every dollar that the state spends on vocational rehabilitation, the federal government will match $3.70. So it's a really good match. I know I know Carlyn was really advocating for $200,000 to pay for post-secondary transition scholarships. So those college programs for students with disabilities who are at a state college or in university. They're transitional programs. They don't qualify for existing scholarships that they have at all Iowa College Student Aid. So this is a really needed area of funding, and Carlyn worked really hard to try to pass that, even after the bill didn't make it through the funnel. So House File 252 would have created the program, and the budgets would have needed to fund it. But since House File 252 didn't pass, they didn't include it in the budget. I will make a note on that program. It did pass the House. The bill, House File 252, did pass the House, and unanimously, 95-0, but the Senate didn't bring it out of committee. So fortunately, in Iowa, it'll start off in the Senate committee next year. So it doesn't have to start through the whole process again. So there is an opportunity for people out there that really like the idea of scholarships for those transitional programs in colleges, to really work on that over the summer and fall to try to get more support in the Senate to get it done. I did want to say there was a really good surprise at the end. Carlyn and I saw this and we were really excited about it. It's the LEAD K program, and that stands for Language Equity and Language Equity and Acquisition for Deaf Kids. And it's actually a national campaign, which goal is that all deaf and hard of hearing children would enter kindergarten with age appropriate language skills. We know that kids often fall behind even before school and then fall further behind in school. And so that was a bill that was adopted last year, passed last year, but this is the first time it's been funded. So the legislature added a new $200,000 appropriation for that program to start rolling out. So that was a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, we had a little unpleasant surprise too. You remember early on, we passed, the state passed the educational savings accounts, which were the voucher program that the governor had proposed that uses the money that would have gone to public schools to give families who want to send their kids to private school funding through an educational savings account. And unfortunately, the area education agencies also get a piece of that public funding. And I think we found there was some serious issues with AEAs and their funding. And so I'm going to have, Carlyn, do you want to kind of go over that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, as Amy said, we were really watching the education budget closely to see if our $200,000 support request for the comprehensive transition scholarships were going to be in it. And unfortunately, what we found was a $22 million cut in AEA funding, which was, I think, a surprise for most everyone, and it came out late. So we didn't have time to, kind of rally the troops and kind of garner some support for not having that cut go through. And it could have some really, tough ramifications for special education. So students who may go to a private school on an educational savings account or voucher, if they are in need of special education, they are still covered by the AEAs. It's the AEA's responsibility to make sure that students are getting the kind of education, special education, and support services that go with it that they need. So it's disappointing that this is being cut at a time when those scholarships are being implemented, and it could have an effect on all kids who need special education, no matter if you're in public school or private school. So we will be looking at that, and if you, as a parent or a provider or a teacher, feel the effects of this next year, please let us know so that we can use your stories to advocate for more support for AEAs in the future. So that was a disappointment. Also, along the lines of schools and education, one of the bills we were watching closely was House File 604, which talked about discipline in the classroom and the need to remove disruptive students was the way the bill was first written. It was changed to not use the word disruptive, but instead say kids who were threatening or promoting violence towards teachers or other students. So that bill did pass, and it is not as bad though as it could have been, which is kind of a theme that I've been using this year. There's things that passed that we didn't like, but they aren't as bad as they could have been, because we had some concerns for students who are on IEPs and whether that is a violation of their rights to be able to stay in the classroom because of their disability. So we will watch how the rules for that bill are implemented and written, and keep a close eye on that in the future also. And one other bill that we're watching in this last couple of weeks that passed, not related to education, but to voting, was what we call the caucus bill. And you probably heard about it. Iowa is trying to keep our caucuses first in the nation. And to do that, they thought they needed to pass a bill that would define how caucuses are performed and how you register in a political party for a caucus. So our concerns with the bill was that it was not creating an accessible environment like some of the parties had suggested would be helpful for people with who are unable to get to a caucus at 7 o'clock on a Monday night. And so the bill does require that you attend your caucus in person, but the parties can also define how they will register people and also how you will vote. So there's some still rules and regulations to come out of that bill also. So those were some disappointments, I guess, but maybe again, somewhere not as bad as they could have been. And so I think that leads us to Amy kind of looking ahead for next session, and not even next session yet, but whether some of these bills are going to be signed by the governor and then on to the next session.
Yeah, so the next steps, we have 30 days. The governor has 30 days to sign bills or veto them. So vetoing a bill would make it not become law. It would stop it from becoming law. And I don't expect probably any of those, because the governor worked really closely with legislators on the bills in the final negotiations. She can also take out sections of budget bills. They call that a line item veto. So you can just cut like one piece of the budget, like one appropriation, but keep the rest of it going into law. But again, I don't expect that or see that happening very much, if at all. But that 30-day window closes on June 5th. So she will be signing bills from now until June 5th. But also looking ahead, this session, we heard a lot of rumors about things that are kind of coming up in the HHS world. And one of those was a bill, you'll recall, it had eliminated a lot of boards and commissions. It got rid of the per diem, that the expenses that people that get paid to come in for meetings. So if you're a public member on a board, you might get some travel money to come in and offset the costs of your mileage. It got rid of that. There were a lot of concerns about how you merge all of these boards into just, together, whether that still gives the right people the right voice. And that was one of the themes that Carlyn and the Iowa DD Council had this year was, making sure people with disabilities are at the table when decisions are made. And so there was a lot of concern about that. The bill didn't pass, but we kind of have heard that's coming up next year, and that might be a department bill that's coming up. So it was kind of a get ready, people bill. It was a message bill, I guess I would call it, from Representative Fry, to say, this is what we've heard coming. So start talking about it. So I think that's one thing we're going to be watching over the summer and fall. And also there's been some rumors that HHS is planning to review regions. So not just your mental health and disability service regions, but also child welfare. The AEAs have regions. The Department on Aging has regions that align with the Aging and Disability Resource Centers, public health regions. They're really county regions. There's probably more. I don't know all of the regions. DHS has their own, HHS has their own regions. So I've heard those lines and maps are going to be redrawn, and that's always controversial and scary for people when things like that happen. So I guess we'll be watching for that, and maybe watching where you'll have input into some of those discussions. I would expect there'll be a lot of discussion about it publicly. That's kind of how HHS has done all of their reorg, is talking it through with people that are a part of the stakeholders. So I think we'll be seeing that. But, really just making sure that the work that is going on with reorganization and all of these changes with departments is being done with, people in mind that they're serving. And so we saw that a lot with this year with the deaf and blind community that were not consulted before the reorganization and had a lot of concerns about what was going on. So I know I'll be watching that, and I'm sure Carlyn and others will be doing the same. And we'll be having those conversations on our capital chats, which we'll continue to have almost monthly. I think we take the month of August off. But speaking of voices at the table, we know that there has been one advocate that we've talked about in the past that has insisted on his voice being heard. And I think Carlyn has a special shout out for us here.
We do. We have a special shout out for Robert Fisher, who I'm sure some of you have heard that name and probably seen his picture. We included him this year in our legislative agenda. We had his picture there, his story there, and his story is about accessibility. And Robert has been trying for over 2 years to try and get his post office to install doors that he can open. So as a person who uses a power wheelchair, he found it difficult to open the door and get his wheelchair inside, even though the post office said that it was accessible under the ADA. He was not still able to get in very easily. So he asked the post office to install doors. They resisted at first, so he went to his legislators, he went to his members of Congress, he went to his city council, he went to the media, he came to the DD council, he went all over the place to advocate for getting those doors to have a push button on them so that he could just push a button and be able to access his post office. And it took him a while, and it took a lot of effort and a lot of talking and a lot of meetings. And they finally changed the doors just in the last 2 weeks. So we have a video to show of that and his success. And we'll come back after that and do our wrap up.
Here is my idea for the handicap, for the handicap, but anyway here, see? Here.
Hi,
Hi,
how you doing today?
how are you?
Not too bad, cold.
Yeah, me too, buddy.
Okay, just a minute. Go ahead.
I'm here to hide right here, out here. I'm that funny.
Say C-I-A-L.
See, I can do it. It's so much easier for me to do it. I can do everything if you put your mind to it, man. Your mind, your heart, and your soul to it, but it does nothing to it.
Okay, wasn't that awesome? So he, Robert, as we said, talked he really made the most of advocacy by reaching out through um, contacting his own legislators, contacting others that he knew were in power in the legislature who could make a difference. And they didn't pass a bill to make the doors accessible. They just advocated on his behalf and went to the post office and asked questions and helped him write a complaint form. So not every change that needs to be made needs to be put into law, although the law was there for the ADA to make things accessible. And so it brought up some questions also about whether the ADA needs to be updated so that some of the new technology that has come out since the 33 years since the ADA was passed, that may need to be updated so that there's more accessibility for people with disabilities. So it's brought up some new questions and concerns and maybe opportunities for us to increase accessibility. And so that was all because of Robert's work and being very persistent and consistent and making his voice heard. So congrats, Robert, for all that you did. And just to wrap up, this is our last snapshot of this session. Amy is, I know she's already at work putting together her review of the session, which I'm sure will be a long infonet that we'll look forward to catching up on all the details of all the bills that were the good, the bad, the ugly, the not so bad, the confusing, the disappointing, and the everything everywhere all at once session that we just got through. And I also want to thank Amy for all the work she did this year and keeping us informed and keeping me informed. She's at the Capitol day and night and long hours and does a lot of great work on our behalf. So thank you, Amy, for that. And keep watching for InfoNet coming up. And our next Capitol chat is May 18th at noon, which is a Thursday, a little different than we usually have. So sign up for that is either you probably got a link in an email or on our website. And one other thing, we have opportunities for everyone to help make their voice heard over the summer by organizing or attending a town hall meeting. So we have grants available for groups that want to organize a town hall meeting and invite their legislators to come hear your stories and the changes that you would like to see made. And whether it's good things that are happening, bad things that are happening, changes that need to be made, they want to hear from you. So this is a great opportunity to get something organized locally. We know that one organization in Southwest Iowa is already working on a town hall meeting, and getting all their legislators from the area to attend. So if you live in that area of the state, watch for that. And if you live in other areas of the state, we could sure be very helpful in getting one or helping you organize one of those, and can put some resources into it for you. So let us know if you're interested in that. It'd be a great way to talk about what happened this year and what you want to see happen next year with your legislators. So with that, I want to thank Amy one more time, and I'll let her wrap up also.
I don't have much more to add, but it's been a great session with you, Carlyn, and we'll just see you at the Capitol chat.